I'm Judith Enck. I'm the president of Beyond Plastics, and we are delighted to welcome you tonight for a powerhouse presentation with three incredible scientists. Our topic is toxic chemicals in plastics. We have well over 400 people already logged in, so I want to get us started. We hope you settle in, pull out your pen and paper, have a cup of herbal tea, and get ready. Beyond Plastics works nationwide to reduce plastic pollution everywhere. Our website is beyondplastics.org, and we do these webinars about 4 times a year. We're not a webinar mill, but we look for emerging topics that we believe is in the public interest. And there certainly is a lot of public interest in the topic of toxic chemicals in plastics, and you will leave tonight smarter than you were 15 minutes ago. We are delighted to welcome our relatively new science director at Beyond Plastics, who will be moderating this evening's discussion. We'll have 2 presentations and then Q&A. Our moderator tonight is Dr. Trisha Vaidyanathan. Trisha just joined us a few months ago. She has a PhD in neuroscience from the University of California at San Francisco. Prior to joining us at Beyond Plastics, Trisha was with the NGO Defend Our Health, and she is just a wonderful technical expert for us on plastics and science. And let me hand over the floor to Trisha.
Thank you, Judith. Thanks for the intro. Well, I'm very excited to introduce our speakers, and I will get ahead with that so we can hear the amazing science they're going to tell us about. So first up, I will be introducing Dr. Ami Zota. Dr. Zota is a population health scientist with expertise in environmental health, environmental justice, and maternal and reproductive health. Her research focuses on understanding social and structural determinants of environmental exposures and their consequent impacts to women's health and outcomes across their life course. Her internationally recognized science and her science communication efforts have informed health and safety standards for a range of consumer product chemicals, such as phthalates, flame retardants, and chemicals in cosmetics. Dr. Zota was among the first to frame the disproportionate burden of toxic chemical exposures from beauty and personal care products among women of color as an environmental justice concern. And excitingly, just recently, Dr. Zota was awarded the David P. Rawl Award for Advocacy in Public Health by the American Public Health Association. So we can all congratulate her on that and give her a warm welcome. I will hand it over to you, Dr. Zota.
Thank you, and good evening, and thank you for joining us. As you know, my bio hopefully reflects. I don't like to just do science that stays in the ivory tower, but I'm very committed to doing science that serves social change. And that is connected to action. And so, and I think part of that is being in conversation with folks like you this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Okay. And so what I'm going to, hopefully everybody can see that, what I'm going to attempt to do, and I'm just going to get a little situated here. Okay. Is just give you a brief primer on human health concerns of toxic chemicals in plastic. And I think this was mentioned, but I'm an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences at Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. And I've been doing work in this area for nearly 2 decades. It's crazy to say that. Okay, so let's see. Sorry, just trying to get situated. Okay. So, there is a growing epidemic of plastic pollution. And this is a really compelling graph from the Lancet Countdown on Health and Plastics. This is a really great resource if you want to dig more into the technical literature. Plastics are a growing and under-recognized danger to human and planetary health. Plastics cause disease and death from infancy to old age and are responsible for health-related economic losses exceeding $1 trillion annually. The principal driver of this crisis is accelerating growth in plastic production. So you can see that's that graph on the left there, from 2 megatons in 1950 to 475 megatons in 2022. That is projected to go over 1,200 megatons by 2060. Plastic pollution has also worsened, and 8,000 megatons of plastic waste now pollute the planet. So, whatever plastic we produce now, we'll be living with the consequences for decades to come. So I know this is a very busy slide. I think the main thing, there's two main takeaways from this slide. One is that there are hazardous chemicals in plastic that have implications for human and planetary health at every stage of the plastic life cycle. So, I know we are usually thinking about like the single use, like the contact with the single use consumption, but the life cycle includes the feedstock extraction of the fossil fuels, the production, the product fabrication, the transport use, the recycling, and the disposal in the environment. So, think about it in terms of production, use, disposal. The second thing that I want to really highlight is in that purple box there, that there are over 10,000 chemicals used to make plastic. Some estimates go as high as 16,000 chemicals. And there is hardly any data on half of the chemicals used. So, we do know that there are certain chemicals of high concern, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg. The other key point that I want to highlight is a lot of the plastics, toxic chemicals of concern in plastics that are well studied are often known as endocrine disrupting chemicals because they are endocrine active, so they can disrupt our hormones. And for these contaminants, as well as many other pollutants, the timing of exposure really matters. And one key vulnerable period is early life. So when the fetus is in utero or during pregnancy. And that's because, the fetus is developing, and even small shifts that happen during that window can change their entire trajectory. This is also known as the fetal origins of adult disease, or the Barker hypothesis. And also kind of applies to nutritional deficiencies, things like famine, but also pollutants. So your life stage can impact your risk. In addition to the prenatal period, early life, infancy, childhood, also puberty, these are all vulnerable windows. And the other thing that's important to understand is the health consequences of chemicals can really vary depending on when you're exposed. So health effects can look different at different, windows of development. The other thing to understand is, plastic chemicals are an everywhere, everyday exposure of concern. But in addition to that, there are certain highly exposed populations, and a lot of the reasons why these populations are highly exposed is due to their increased social vulnerability. As Tricia mentioned, I do a lot of work on environmental justice, so I'm thinking about these upstream factors that shape our environmental risk. So frontline and fence line communities, like the ones in Louisiana, in St. James Parish and the whole area known as Cancer Alley, they're at heightened risk because they literally, these plastic and petrochemical industries are in their backyard. So we're currently doing research with these communities to help them, essentially kind of have science to back up their lived experience. Workers in plastics production and manufacturing facilities is another highly exposed population. And often what we know about the health effects of these chemicals comes from first studying them in occupational settings because they are often, the canaries in the coal mine. Lastly, we have to think about populations in the global south because a lot of the plastic waste and e-waste in particular is going there both for to be burned by incinerators and also in landfills. So both, there's the concern about the communities near the incinerators, and then, as this photo shows, there's also just a lot of formal and informal e-waste workers that are in close proximity to these pollutants. Um, while we may not know a lot about certain chemical classes, there are others that have been studied for decades, whose health risks are well established. And some of these now may be household names. I'm not sure for you all. And it's unfortunate that we all sort of have to become chemists to kind of help sort of safeguard our own health. But so kind of four classes of chemicals that I want to touch upon today are phthalates, bisphenols, brominated flame retardants, and per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. So these are all endocrine disrupting chemicals. They can some mimic estrogens, some are sort of anti-androgenic, which is a precursor to testosterone. Several of these interact with the thyroid hormone system. And then we're going to kind of talk about the health effects. So even at low levels, they can kind of have longstanding impacts on our endocrine system, which can have implications for a whole host of diseases and disorders. And several of these are also persistent in the environment. So that's the other thing to know, is that once they're in use, even if the products are gone from our home, they stay in our environment where we can be exposed in various ways. This is a really important slide. So I do a lot of work on how different populations are exposed to toxic chemicals and how they enter our body. One of the primary exposure pathways for almost all of these chemicals that I talked about is our food systems and in diet. Right, we both have to be concerned about what's used in the food contact materials, it's like especially the packaging, but even things like the vinyl gloves that workers may wear when they're coming in contact with the food. The other issue is because a lot of these chemicals bioaccumulate in the environment, they can actually just end up, in cows, in the soil, and kind of end up in our food system that way. So, diet is a big way. For certain contaminants like PFAS, drinking water is a big source. Another one that people don't think about is indoor air and house dust. And now I'm just talking about kind of the overall general uses of these chemicals. So a lot of them are used in things like paint or home furnishings. And so, they don't stay in these products. And because of some of the properties of the chemicals, they can settle into our dust, which can also be another way we're exposed, especially for young children. And then also consumer product use directly. So this is a picture of dental floss, which is known to have PFAS. I also, as mentioned, study beauty products and personal care products, which can be another direct source. So now I'm just going to kind of briefly go over a little bit about each chemical, and I'm going to try to keep it short. So I've spent a lot of time studying phthalates. They're used in hundreds of everyday products. They vary. So this is a whole class, and the different phthalates are used for different purposes. So one whole set is used, for example, to help bind fragrances to, your shampoo or to your perfume. Others are actually used to make polyvinyl chloride soft. So there's some of the most widely used plasticizers The ones that are used as plasticizers, I mean, one, they're used in hospital equipment as well as vinyl floor, but they're also used, those are the ones that are often found in our food. Um, Nearly everyone has metabolites of phthalates in their bodies, and we know that using data from the CDC. They do sort of testing or surveillance every couple of years. Phthalates especially are anti-androgenic, so they can disrupt testosterone signaling. There's strong evidence of reproductive toxicity, both in male and female animals. In humans, phthalates are associated with increased risk of infertility, preterm birth, male reproductive tract development, and impaired learning and brain development. And they're suspected to play a role in obesity and other chronic diseases. The other thing I just want to say, and this is just a general kind of, take home point for environmental health studies. You hear a lot about randomized clinical trials, and they, are great in the sense that that study design can really help eliminate bias. But for things like phthalates and the types of toxicants we're talking about today, it's not ethical to do a clinical trial because it's not ethical to intentionally expose people to high levels of these contaminants. And so the way we synthesize the evidence is we look for reproducibility, and we also look for consistency between kind of controlled animal studies and observational epidemiologic studies. And happy to answer questions about that in the Q&A. Just want to highlight, this was a review article I did with the Project Tender, which is a great consortium to follow of health scientists, clinicians, and children's health advocates, where we reviewed the neurotoxicity of orthophthalates, but importantly, we also made recommendations for policy reforms. And, in that we concluded that the evidence was sufficient to, to recommend that pregnant women should not be exposed to phthalates at all, and that we need to do whatever we can to reduce their exposures. Okay, I'm going to quickly move on. So bisphenols is another class of chemicals. These are used in polycarbonate plastics as well as epoxy. And this is from the European Environmental Agency. They classify bisphenol A as a hazardous substance. You can see some of the same types of health effects: neurodevelopmental effects, hormone-related cancer, immunotoxic effects, infertility. The other thing I just want to point out is, so this, I think, was phased out of baby bottles, but unfortunately, often what we get is the regrettable substitutes. So in this case, industry slightly modified the chemicals to bisphenol S and bisphenol A. Unfortunately, now we're seeing they have some of the same endocrine active properties. So we get this a lot, this whack-a-mole problem. Now I want to talk about brominated flame retardants. So I worked on these like 15 years ago, and it's been interesting to kind of see how these are emerging again as a problem. So these are chemicals that are added to different consumer products to help them, not ignite if like decrease fire risk. Over time, the data on the efficacy of some of these chemicals have come into question, and there has been some phase out. But what we're finding now is the flame retardants that were used, particularly in electronic products, are now showing up in recycled plastic materials. And you may have kind of seen the whole black spatula alert from a study, I think in late 2023. Well, it's because these black spatulas had very high levels of brominated flame retardants, very close to the ones that are used in electronics. So the theory is that the plastic in these electronics are being recycled and used in things like black spatulas, and but unfortunately the flame retardants are being recycled with it. And it's like a whole soup of, there's a whole range of flame retardants that can show up. But there's some that have been studied, these PVDEs, and those have, and I studied them a long time ago. And there we really saw that higher levels of PVDEs, especially during pregnancy, were associated with longer time to pregnancy, changes in thyroid hormones, lower birth weight, and poor attention coordination and lower IQ. And the IQ, like the neurodevelopmental impacts, were particularly consistent across studies, and quite stark. And so here I just want to put it in contrast to the neurodevelopmental impacts of lead. I think it's quite well known that lead is can really irreversibly harm learning and brain development, especially in children. And so here you could see this one large study, found about 6 decrements in IQ points. And, the effect for these PVD exposures during pregnancy is about 4 or 5. And these aren't exactly the same flame retardants that were found in that black spatulas study, but, this is just kind of to give you a frame of reference for what we know. And lastly, just want to talk a little bit about the health risk of PFAS. I know that these are getting a lot of attention, as they should, because they really are everywhere. They're known as the forever chemicals. They don't easily degrade in the environment. There is consistency between evidence in animal and human studies. I think the other thing to note here is that PFOA has been classified as carcinogenic to humans, and PFOS as possibly carcinogenic. This is the Interagency for something on cancer. Sorry, IARC. I forgot what it's called, but it's based in Europe. But they're essentially a scientific entity that often kind of reviews all the evidence and comes up with various classifications on different substances. That's really being driven by testicular and kidney cancers. And then the other thing about PFAS is really their impact on cholesterol, blood pressure, and chronic disease. So the last thing I just want to end with is, I know there's a common question is, are bioplastics safer than conventional plastics? So these are, ones that are made of plant-based materials. They're often promoted as a sustainable alternative, but many contain hazardous chemicals. So they haven't been, very well studied. But here's, I think, one study that I was looking at recently. They looked at 43 bioplastic materials. Nearly 70% contain toxic ingredients, with those made of starch and cellulose to be more toxic than the ones made from bamboo. And they found that bio-based, biodegradable plastics and conventional plastics were similarly toxic. So all of it to say that, this is a very brief overview. And, I really consider this to be the tip of the iceberg of characterizing and understanding the depth of the public health impacts of plastic pollution. So with that, I just want to say thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Zota. Okay, if we are ready, I will move on and have the immense pleasure of now introducing Dr. Ryan Babadi. He is an environmental health scientist with experience across, oh, and I just realized my camera's off. There we go. That's the risk when I turn it off. So, hi. So he is an environmental health scientist with experience across academia, government, and the nonprofit sector. He is the science director at Toxic Free Future, which is a national leader in environmental health research and advocacy. His research experience involves epidemiological studies of environmental exposures and related health outcomes. Ryan has completed postdoctoral research fellowships at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and at Harvard Chan School Public Health. He holds a PhD in environmental toxicology from the University of Washington and an MPH from UCLA. So thank you, Ryan, and I will let you take it away.
Hey, thanks for that kind introduction. And those are some great slides, Ami. Thank you very much. So I'll get started, everybody. A few points to refresh us on the magnitude of the problem with plastics. Ami did a great job of this, but I'll just refresh us a little bit. So to start, plastics are complex mixtures that include both intentional chemical constituents as well as non-intentionally added substances, including contaminants, impurities, and reaction byproducts. A study came out this year that attempted to comprehensively map all chemicals that can be present in plastics. And this study identified more chemicals than was previously known, amounting to over 16,000. The paper concluded that 4,200 of these chemicals were chemicals of concern due to high hazards to environmental health. Furthermore, over 10,000 of these chemicals lacked authoritative regulatory hazard information, suggesting serious data gaps on safety of plastic-associated chemicals. You can find out more about this topic looking for the PlastChem database online. A primary reason plastics are a problem, in addition to being complex mixtures that often lack transparency and are toxic, is that there are hazards associated with plastics across all stages of the plastic's life cycle, not just during use, but from extraction and production all the way to the end of life and disposal. One way to think about the consequences of the health hazards presented by toxic plastics is to consider the costs on society. Here in the United States, where I'm based, there are varying estimates of the costs of health effects from plastic-associated chemicals, but one prominent estimate of plastic attributable disease burden is $249 billion annually for just a few select classes of plastic-associated chemicals, including phthalates and bisphenols. Just a few days ago, a team at Duke released a report titled The Social Cost of Plastic to the United States, and they estimate the real cost of plastics are between $436 billion and $1.1 trillion per year when accounting for costs across the plastic's life cycle. The largest share of this cost is categorized as disease and mortality from toxic chemicals due to plastic use, and the authors report this is likely an underestimate due to data gaps and the potential of cumulative effects from multiple exposures, as we all are exposed to multiple chemicals simultaneously in the real world. The chemical consequences, the health consequences of chemical exposures to plastic pollution can be even worse for marginalized populations across the globe. According to an international commission of scientists, policy analysts, and other experts on plastic and human health, the adverse health effects of plastics and plastic pollution disproportionately affect the most poor, marginalized, and disempowered populations globally. So with that, we'll move on to a deep dive on two different individual plastics. So with that refresher behind us, I'll move on to PVC and PVDC, polyvinyl chloride and polyvinylidene chloride, excuse me. These two plastics have a wide array of applications across consumer, commercial, and industrial products. Some of the most prominent uses include building materials, food packaging, and household products. PVC is one of the most highly produced plastics in the world, listed in the top 3, while PVDC is more specialized, but still significant. PVC can be produced in rigid and flexible forms. The primary use of PVC are in building materials. This includes piping, plumbing, fittings, siding, roofing, flooring, the list goes on. It's also used in household products like shower curtains, vinyl records, and children's toys. PVDC is known for its use in plastic packaging for food, and you can think of your typical transparent plastic cling wrap. PVDC has desirable properties as a barrier in plastic packaging for meats and cheeses especially. It's also used in food pouches, medical products, pharmaceuticals, and blister packaging. PVC and PVDC are chlorinated plastics, which makes them unique and particularly hazardous across their life cycles. So how is it that we are exposed to toxics related to PVC and PVDC plastics? It's important to keep in mind that toxic exposures begin even before we as consumers make use of them. That's because to generate plastics like PVC and PVDC, there are extraction, chemical processing, production, manufacturing, and transportation steps that expose humans to toxic chemicals, as well as contaminate both wildlife and the environment. Namely, during the manufacture and transport of these plastics, there are various chemicals used in processing and synthesis. For example, production of PVC and copolymers like PVDC is a predominant use of vinyl chloride, a toxic chemical used as a key ingredient in the formulation of these plastics. PVDC production relies on vinylidene chloride, which is also of toxicological concern. And a third example, ethylene dichloride, is a toxic chemical used in production of vinyl chlorides. And we'll get more into the toxicity of these chemicals a little bit later. But that's not all. PVC and PVDC plastics can involve the use and release of a multitude of additional hazardous chemicals during their production, including chlorine gas, asbestos, PFAS, mercury, and dioxins. So there's no shortage of hazards there. And importantly, the production of PVC and PVDC plastics is an environmental justice issue, as it's fence-line communities and low-income communities of color that are subjected disproportionately to the pollution and contamination events related to these chemicals. Toxic Free Futures published some research reports related to PVDC and PVC. Andrew will be dropping links to them in the chat, and we can provide them afterwards as well. I'll quote some findings here. Over 370,000 US residents live within 3 miles of a vinyl chloride, PVC manufacturing, or PVC waste disposal facility. And people living in these communities are younger, more diverse, and earn far less than national per capita income. Okay, with exposure continued here, during use, people are exposed to PVC and PVDC, including their additives, via products and materials that are composed of these substances or packaged in them. For example, exposure could occur when a child plays with a vinyl plastic toy. I want to display this image from the Washington State Department of Ecology, which depicts some pathways of exposures for PVC and PVDC specifically in plastic packaging. PVC and PVDC in plastic packaging results in potential migration of chemicals and food contamination, for example, plasticizer chemicals from PVC and PVDC food packaging. Exposure occurs via inhalation and accidental ingestion. This figure does a nice job of displaying multiple pathways for exposure. Again, keep in mind it's focused only on PVC and PVDC in plastic packaging, as there are other sources as well. Upon disposal at end of life, PVC and PVDC materials persist and contribute to chemical contamination, microplastic pollution, and dangerous combustion events, all of which can expose humans to hazardous chemicals. For example, burning PVC releases dangerous toxic chemicals, including hydrochloric acid and dioxins. Considering PVC's use in building materials, burning PVC during building fires can pose additional hazards to nearby communities, of course, also to first responders, such as firefighters. Now we'll dive into the hazards of just some of the chemicals associated with PVC and PVDC, starting with chemicals used in their production. Vinyl chloride, which I mentioned before, is a toxic chemical and known human carcinogen. It's additionally associated with adverse health outcomes, including neurological, immunological, and developmental health effects. PVDC production relies on vanillidine chloride, a toxic chemical that is linked to hazardous health effects of the respiratory system, liver, and kidneys. As a reminder, the vanillidine chloride monomer remains present in PVDC copolymers used for food packaging. It has the potential to migrate into food based on some studies. Ethylene dichloride is a toxic chemical used in production of vinyl chlorides and is linked to hazardous health effects of the respiratory system, liver, and kidneys, and is a probable human carcinogen. Next up, I want to touch on just one category of functional additives in plastics known as plasticizers. Historically, plasticizers for PVC have included phthalates, and thanks to Ami's slides, we all understand that concern a little better. Additionally, there are non-phthalate plasticizers that in many cases have been considered safer alternatives to phthalate plasticizers. One popular example is DINCH or DINCH, which is common in medical devices, children's toys, food packaging, PVC flooring, and textile coatings. Other non-phthalate plasticizers include adipates like DHA, citrates like ATBC, and vegetable oil derivatives like ESBO. While there may be evidence that they are safer than phthalates in some instances, we should still be concerned about the use of these substitutes in order to avoid what came up earlier tonight, a regrettable substitution, which implies the substitution of one hazardous chemical for another. For example, there's increasing concern that DINCH is a toxicant and potential endocrine disruptor in its own right. Furthermore, studies have shown that DHA, ATBC, and ESBO can all migrate from polymers into foods, and DHA in particular has been found in food and in breast milk, dust, and marine environments, and mounting evidence suggests that it may be an endocrine disruptor and genotoxic substance for fish and other organisms. ESBO has also been linked to lipid metabolism disorders in experimental studies. There are additional additives of concern as well. PVC is known for additives, which have included organotins, lead, cadmium, and flame retardants. And finally, PVC and PVDC are contributors to microplastic pollution, which will be the focus of the next few slides here. So microplastics, what are they? Mounting evidence suggests that microplastics are everywhere, including in remote environments across the globe, in our food, water, in the air, and inside of our bodies, defined as any plastic particles less than 5 millimeters in size, including nanoplastics that are less than 1 micrometer in size. Microplastics are widespread environmental contaminants that have serious implications for human and environmental health. Across plastics production, use, and disposal, all the different stages of the life cycle, microplastics are released into the environment. Common plastics that comprise microplastic pollution include polystyrene, polypropylene, polyethylene, PVC, and not to be forgotten are microfibers from synthetic textiles and fabrics, which comprise a major source of aquatic microplastic pollution. Furthermore, PVC is considered to be one of the top 3 contributors to microplastic pollution, and a recent study that looked at the risk of harm from microplastics in general determined PVC, polypropylene, and polystyrene had the highest cumulative risks associated with them. Drilling down into exposure now, much like many of the toxic chemicals in our environment, exposure to microplastics is virtually inescapable. Microplastics are prominent contaminants of our food systems and are present in what we eat, the water and beverages we drink, and the air we breathe, as I already mentioned. Thus, a primary route of exposure to microplastics is via ingestion. Something that's very difficult to avoid. I'll quickly highlight some research that suggests drinking water exclusively from plastic bottled sources results in higher exposure than drinking tap water. Next up, inhalation exposure. Prominent factors in inhalation exposure to microplastics include plastic containing synthetic textiles and other materials, industrial or occupational processes that may release airborne microplastics. And although ingestion is thought to be a primary route of exposure, some estimates I've seen in the literature suggest nearly half of total daily exposure to microplastics can occur via inhalation. Some household products are intentionally formulated to include microplastics, such as personal care products, cosmetics, and cleaning products, and their usage results in human exposure as well as environmental contamination. Other plastic-containing products may result in microplastic release and exposure through regular use or product degradation, such as from plastic cutting boards, for example. And of course, in those cases, there are safer alternatives that are available. On to microplastics hazard. Microplastics exert toxic effects in humans via their physical and chemical properties. There is mounting evidence that microplastics are linked to a concerning range of adverse health outcomes, including leading global causes of morbidity and mortality, such as cardiovascular disease and cancer. Uptake by cells can lead to physical disruption and penetration of sensitive biological structures, resulting in inflammation, oxidative stress, and cellular toxicity. Multiple chemical constituents from plastic-associated chemicals have complex hazard profiles that can include carcinogenicity and endocrine disruption, for example, from vinyl chloride or phthalates. Furthermore, microplastics undergo changes in response to environmental conditions that include physical alterations, as well as both absorbing and exchanging chemicals, including other hazardous pollutants from their surroundings and give and take. Examples of hazardous pollutants taken up by microplastics include PFAS, heavy metals, and pesticides. I want to highlight a rapid systematic review that was conducted by a group known for their expertise in conducting reviews that was published last year at UCSF, and they concluded that microplastics harm human reproductive, digestive, and respiratory health. We tend to focus on human health, but environmental and wildlife harms should not be neglected. Microplastics are known to be persistent and bioaccumulative environmental contaminants, and as such, they have the capability to disrupt natural environmental processes and exert toxic effects on terrestrial and marine wildlife, including fish species that humans consume. And finally, although this is a rapidly expanding area of research with microplastics, we cannot delay action on microplastics, and we should demand protections for human health and the environment from the harms of microplastics. So moving on to some solutions. At Toxic Free Future, we know progress happens when every part of our system, the government, corporations, and communities, takes responsibility. Our essential elements are a critical framework for strong chemical policy that can help businesses and government move away from toxic plastics and chemicals toward safer solutions. It emphasizes the need not only to ban bad actor chemicals and plastics, but ensure safer substitutes as well. So keep this framework in mind. For those interested in taking practical steps to protect public health against some of the threats we've discussed today, we invite you to take action by signing our petition to Home Depot to stop selling vinyl chloride. I believe a link will be presented in the chat at some point for that. I invite you all to participate. And then finally, I just wanted to take a second. We're really lucky here in Washington State to have the Safer Products for Washington program. This is the Washington State Department of Ecology's program, and it's an example of a critical state government program that helps solve the problem with toxics and plastics and in general. Some links to our website should enter the chat covering this. This is the nation's strongest law regulating toxic chemicals and products, which are a major source of toxic exposures and environmental contamination. The program identifies safer solutions to priority products that commonly use priority chemicals of concern, such as bisphenols and receipt paper, or as highlighted here from one of our press releases, plastic PVC and PVDC packaging. Where safer solutions are identified, ecology has the ability to restrict the chemicals of concern by class, which is really important in the priority product. The state also invests in companies making transitions to safer solutions. So we need governmental programs like these to be strengthened and expanded if we're serious as a society about combating the environmental health risks of toxics and plastics and in general. Okay, that's all I've got. I just wanted to, again, encourage you all to take action and visit our website. I want to thank all the attendees for being here and for your engagement and interest in this important topic area. Dr. Ami Zota and everyone at Beyond Plastics and Toxic Free Future as well for their support.
Great. Thank you, both of you. So I believe that the Q&A will be open now, and we'll start to get questions coming in. Great, it looks like it's open. But I thought I would start with some ahead of time. So Ryan, you just used, I think, the word inescapable for microplastics exposure. And I'm wondering for either of you, and this is a question, I should say, sorry, from William, it's a submitted question. If we know of any ways to eliminate these microplastics from our bodies, and I will take it a step further, if that's okay with William, to ask for other chemicals as well, chemicals that you talked about too, Ami.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that I, that there's a lot of evidence about how to purge your body from these. I mean, some of these chemicals, like phthalates and bisphenols, are, they don't stick around in the body as long. So reducing your exposure, you can quickly see impacts. So they have done studies where people change their diet or, forgo access to certain products, and they will see kind of reductions in the levels in their urine. I mean, I don't know of anything equivalent to like chelation, which is something that is available for people who have really, really, really high levels of lead. And then the other thing that helps with, not that I know, I don't think it's been well studied for these contaminants per se, but certain vitamins can sort of help with reduce absorption of certain pollutants. And so we know more of that from kind of studying lead, which has been really well studied. But I think that there's active research in that area too, to try to understand if there are sort of, certain nutrients that can sort of help reduce uptake in the body.
I can add to that a little bit. I know there's been some popular press about opportunities to remove microplastics from the body. I'd be highly skeptical of anything that doesn't have a longstanding medical, credible, scientific history of being used in a safe way. So I would just contend that instead of eliminating these contaminants from our bodies, why not remove them from the stream of commerce and plastic production so we don't have to worry about that to begin with. But I'll just leave it at that.
I think that's a great answer. Looking through this chat, we have so many questions about silicone, and I was wondering if either of you have any insight, and I'm curious about this too, with questions from, let's see, at least 4 or 5 people. I'm looking at David and Martha. What do we know about the safety of silicone as it relates to this and as an alternative to plastic?
I can't say that I'm well versed on sort of toxicity studies of silicone. Ryan?
Yeah, so when I think of silicones, I think of a chemical class called siloxanes that are the building blocks of silicones. And I would say that what's really exciting about Washington State is that we're taking action on siloxanes in cosmetics because they're used in cosmetics really prominently. And also, people typically associate silicone as bakeware, cookware. I think very recently a study came out showing that individual chemicals that are in silicones, like siloxanes that are used to generate silicones, can remain and be in the end product where they're not supposed to be, and then result in contamination of the air during cooking processes or also of the food that they come into contact with. So there are some siloxanes that have concerning hazard profiles, and there are certain siloxanes that the European Union has considered to be chemicals and substances of very high concern because of their persistence and bioaccumulation potential. So I'd be concerned about silicones as well. I think as far as bakeware and cookware is concerned, look to safer alternatives that we know are good, like stainless steel and wood.
Thank you. I think that makes sense. And a lot of this is new and hard to assess very quickly. So I wanted to bring up another question that we had. I think taking a step back and looking big picture, this is a question that came from Harriet, and it was about whether there was a good way to break down this overall messaging we have about toxicity and plastics and its safety into smaller segments or in some way that it would seem less overwhelming and make it feel less hopeless. And I would be curious to hear both of your perspectives on that.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the industry has, kind of made it into like this, kind of individual level problem and kind of recycle your way out of it. Those have been some of the messages. And so, I mean, I think one of the key things is that we need both kind of state level action, we need national action, and we need international action. And that, it's kind of like all hands on deck are necessary to solve this problem, kind of long term for a long-term solution. I think in terms of what individuals can do, I think starting small is can go a long way. The things that you feel like you have control over, maybe it's about, kind of targeting like, 2 to 3 things that you want to, focus on, like in the kitchen or something, or just reducing usage of single-use plastic, or, just kind of eliminating fragrances, that's a big one, just from the personal care product world. Like there's a lot of icky chemicals there. So, um, I don't think people should feel like they need to do everything all at once. Um, and small actions are important. And then I think also just thinking about the need for collective action and trying to play a role in that, I think is really important because that we don't want to just send the message that we can shop our way out of this problem.
Thank you. The next question comes from Liz. She asks if there are any thoughts on synthetic turf in playing fields.
I mean, I think there are a lot of concerns. I think I was just seeing some study that maybe said that kids after they played on synthetic turf maybe had higher levels of PFAS in their bodies. So I do think it is a potential route of exposure, especially for kids, and I think that's one where local action can play a key role.
Yeah, I'll add that the sources of this chemical compound that's of concern to Washington State, 6-PPD quinone, turf fields can contain rubber created from recycled tires, which are a common problem. And this is a toxicant in the environment that we should be concerned about. So I'll just leave that there. You can find out more information on the Department of Health and Ecology websites.
Thank you. The next question I have comes from Donna, and she asks if there's any legislation currently ongoing in DC or any other states that are aiming to rid plastic products from our environment.
So, I mean, I think things are happening at the state level, and I don't know if Judith wants to intervene speak up, but I know California has, there's a lot of activity going on in California. I think there have been attempts, I believe, in New York State, and I know Judith can speak on that. Unfortunately, I don't think much is right now going to happen at the federal level, and so action's really going to come at the state level, and then there are a lot of attempts by people, with the International Plastics Treaty to emphasize the role of health and kind of considerations around health in that treaty. But Judith, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Zota. We at Beyond Plastics work a lot at the state level, not at the federal level today because it is such an uphill struggle there other than trying to block bad things. But as an example, in New York, there's a bill called the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, which requires a 30% reduction in all single-use packaging over 12 years. The bill started out as a 50% reduction over 10 years. But to get it through the New York State Senate, those numbers were amended. It also bans many of the chemicals you talked about tonight, 15 very toxic chemicals, including the whole PFAS family. It does not allow for chemical recycling to count as recycling because chemical recycling, which is a whole other webinar, is a false solution that does not solve the plastic crisis. And then finally, it puts a modest fee on packaging, so money goes to local governments to fund waste reduction and recycling. The key thing about an effective state bill is it needs to keep a focus on reduction, not plastics recycling, because plastics recycling has been an abysmal failure. We need to reduce, and we also need to get toxic chemicals out of packaging. So we have a model bill that can be introduced in state legislatures around the country. I think that's what the action is on this topic.
If I can add, just drawing attention back, that was great, Judith, but also to the Safer Products for Washington program, which is acting on PVC and PVDC in plastic packaging. TFF was a driver of this legislation, and we're hoping to lead the way on regulating these chemicals.
Yeah, I mean, Washington State, I think, has done the most. And perhaps that's due to the incredible environmental work done by Toxic Free Future and other organizations. They are the pace car on how you get toxics out of your life. I am afraid we are out of time for questions. So before I do a proper thank you for everyone, I want to make two announcements. One is we have a new book coming out December 2nd called The Problem with Plastic. And the cover is similar to the tip of the iceberg slide that Dr. Zota used. Great minds think alike. We want to urge you to pre-order the book. This is our first book, and we've learned about the importance of pre-orders. If you pre-order, then big book buyers see a high level of public interest. So you can get this wherever you buy your books. Some options are listed at the bottom. Hope you will go to a independent bookstore and not the company that starts with A. And we just dropped in the chat the link to pre-order. If you go to our publisher, which is The New Press, thenewpress.org, wonderful progressive nonprofit publisher, you can get a 30% discount if you use the code BeyondPlastic30. So that is my shameless pitch for the book, but it's a great holiday gift, I would say. The other thing is please consider making a charitable donation to Beyond Plastics. We love doing these webinars and public education. We always keep them for free. Please support our work. You can just click on that QR code. Those are two of our volunteers working to pass the packaging reduction bill in Albany. Click on the QR code or go to beyondplastics.org to get more information and to make a very generous donation. Our next webinar will be January 28th. It'll be on the book. It'll be myself, my co-author, Adam Mahoney, a very smart journalist out of New Orleans, and also our communications director, Melissa Valiant. So your homework assignment is to read the book, get one for your public library, and then join our next webinar, January 28th at 7 o'clock. We will invite you all since you signed in today. So I really want to thank all of our speakers, our presenters. Tricia, any final thoughts before we say goodnight?
No, thank you so much to our speakers. I think this was really helpful.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for coming.